Hey, good afternoon, everybody. There were a bunch of more people that had signed up, so we may get people jumping on as we go. Also, just to remind folks, if you haven't been on these before, that this is a sort of off the record conversation. So if we hear some stuff that's great, it's not for the press at this point, unless somebody wants to put something in the press, should get back to the speaker, to Shirelle, and let her know that they want to print something. I think of PCCP as a think tank, as a bunch of folks that want to see positive change and are hopefully thinking deeper than just the slogans sometimes that we hear. On that note, let me get started. I'm pleased to introduce Councilmember and Majority Leader Cherelle Parker. I've known Shirelle for more than 15 years and have appreciated her straightforward approach and her strength in building bridges and partnerships. And most of us know that's really how stuff gets done. I think we've had more than enough of the crazy rhetoric out there that is both dishonest and dangerous. So we want honesty. We want people that are speaking truth to power. You can read about some of her accomplishments in the bio that we sent out. You can go back and look at that. There was a lot more. We pared that down. It's a lot, but there's a lot of accomplishments to talk about. So I've also found Shirelle to be open to hearing diverse viewpoints that might be lost in the popular slogans of the day. So at the same time, she has been working with those with the very least. She has pushed for the broader good too, with programs like Philly First Home that helps working people to purchase their first home. And we know that that's really important right now with the drop in home ownership, especially in Black and Brown communities. More recently, while it's been easy to see the problems that persist in policing, Shirelle has been unafraid to channel the concerns of her constituents around the lack of enough community policing. And I, for one, appreciate her smart, common sense problem-solving approach and down to earth warmth and honesty that has helped her to naturally assume her leadership positions. Shirelle will talk about her neighborhood safety and community policing plan here and other initiatives to keep our city on the right track as we continue to deal with our recovery from COVID and the last couple years of challenges. And maybe we'll hear about her future plans for herself as well. So we'll wait to hear from about that. It may not be today,
excuse me, Andy.
Yeah.
You all hear that just because we started, a gentleman has started to cut grass, and I can't get through it with this. So you're going to have to give me 60 seconds to tell him to stop it. Okay. 1 second, please.
and he'll listen, I'm sure. So that's where we are, and glad to see we have a nice room here of squares. Anything else I can say while she's telling him to stop cutting the grass? Anybody else have a comment?
Well, I'm walking into my office right now, but obviously, I'm very excited to have Shirelle on the call this afternoon. Again, very broad and deep experience, but always with a human face. And that's super important in this day and age. She's a listener and doesn't think she knows everything, which is really refreshing.
Yep, totally agree. Okay, well, with that, I'm going to hand it off to Cherelle Parker, our council member and majority leader in City Council.
It looks like she hasn't come back from the lawn.
Oh, she was there for a second. I think she had to go back and tell that guy where to go. There she is. All right, we're ready for you. Are you ready for us?
So first, let me just quickly start by saying a huge Thank you to each of you who are members of this Philly Committee on City Public Policy. Andy and Tom, I love the way you have described this group as a think tank. And that's extremely important to me because I am always trying to connect with the best and brightest minds who will be open to what I view as essential policy recommendations that may not be popular, right? But essential and necessary as it relates to us being able to move Philadelphia forward. So Andy, whenever I see you and you tell people how long we've known each other, my Jewish mother, Mary Herdick, is on. Mary, he's starting to make me feel like 50 is really here. So, Andy, that was a long, long time ago. Into Tom, when Tom got on, I had to say to Tom, wait, yeah, we know each other, like where? And then, you know, there was a connection. We worked together, have some personal affinity for each other because of personal relationships, but also through Pew, which is where we connected. And I was shocked to learn that he loves some people who I love too. So it's an honor to be with you. Jeff Horn, where are you, Jeff? Is your camera on? No, your camera's not on. I love you, my friend. Thank you.
I'm here.
Thank you for being here. And I also see Pedro, and I see, I think I saw Orfanelli here. She was here somewhere. And of course, oh, here you are. So lots of folk that I have worked with over the years and interacted with. And I want to start by saying what you see is what you get. For those of you who are on this call, who I have not interacted with before, you know, authenticity is extremely important. I am not a Manchurian official. I am not a Manchurian candidate. What you always get will be me, and it will be consistently the same no matter the audience. So if you all would give Rachel the opportunity to share her screen, I can quickly walk through a plan that I am extremely proud of that we introduced. Let me start by saying I think that we were Rachel, I don't know, maybe we were in March or April. Time is running together now. I don't remember.
End of March.
It was March, and it was, I think, even the day before the mayor introduced his budget. And during that time, we unveiled this Philadelphia neighborhood safety and community policing plan in West Philadelphia on a neighborhood commercial corridor in front of a Black-owned business. Council President Darrell Clark, Whip Jones, Deputy Whip Squilla, Gilmore Richardson, and Thomas were the council members who joined with us, along with business association leaders, community development association leaders. Paul Levy was with us. And I'm gonna put a pin in what I just said. We were in West Philly in the neighborhood, but Paul Levy from the Center City District, he was with us to announce this plan, and that was extremely significant. I want to start here. Most of us know the late, great poet and author, Dr. Maya Angelou. And I would argue that today we could learn a great deal from her, and especially her quote that is very well known, in which she stated that in life, people will forget what you said, they will forget what you did, but people will never, ever forget how you made them feel. Whether we like it or not, there is a harsh reality facing our city, and that is that the people who live here, who own businesses here, who work here, and the people who visit here, they don't feel safe. And we all know the challenge and or the reason why. Increase in violent crime, the homicides, the non-deadly shootings, the carjackings, the retail theft, the sense that lawlessness is being allowed to prevail in our city, and that it's not being checked. With that being said, when my team and I worked on this plan, and I want you to know, for those of you who know me, you know, I am not ever interested in simply grabbing a headline. That's not been my modus operandi. As a staffer working in the office of Councilwoman Marion Tasco and or a member of the General Assembly or a member of council, I am going to always make sure that I do my homework and that I've talked to people impacted by any public policy that I am proposing. With that being said, I want to walk through copies of a copy of the plan today, and we're going to distribute it to you. We're going to put it in the chat, and if you're interested in getting some hard copies for distribution, let us know, and we will order those for you as well. Rachel, let's start with the intro now. So, and I don't know, Rachel, if you have the ability to do what we did this Saturday when we were walking through it with the church organizations from across the city, but it allowed the full screen to show. It seems pretty small. I'm going to proceed, but if you can make any adjustments, that'll be great.
That better? I just zoomed in.
No, it doesn't do the full screen like it was. As a matter of fact, it's large, so large now that the text is out of frame.
Okay, I'm
I think
sorry.
everyone
I'll
has-
try and figure it out.
Folks have the power themselves to zoom in with their own settings on their own screens also.
Okay, all right, that sounds good. There are 5 primary focus areas of the plan. And the first area that we touched is the issue of community policing. And that is the nucleus, the foundation of the plan. When I describe community policing, I want you to know I am referencing cops walking the beat, cops that are on bikes, not officers who are responding to crime. I'm talking about employing the use of a proactive strategy as it relates to community policing that will allow us to strengthen community and police relations in neighborhoods across the city. What I am proposing is in addition to all of the current policing strategies employed by our police commissioner, Outlaw, and the city that focuses on the 57 blocks that have a high propensity for violence to take place in the city of Philadelphia, those areas that are most impacted by the opioid crisis and where more resources are being directed. All of our GVI, gun violence intervention strategies. We're not talking about any of that. We are talking about putting 300 police officers, uniformed, sworn duty officers on the streets of Philadelphia, in neighborhoods across the city of Philadelphia, on bikes and walking the beat. That would mean commercial quarters, recreation centers, libraries. It also gives a smaller area of service that in the past has strengthened community policing because these officers actually become a part of the fabric of our communities. And in essence, not only does it just build a sense of a stronger relationship with law enforcement, but it bolsters transparency. It strengthens relationships with businesses and neighbors, but it also is proactive because when people get to know officers, they trust them. They give them access to information. And we were unapologetic about our advocacy for this, despite some of the popular slogans that we have heard, particularly over the last 2 years regarding the need for Philadelphia and cities and states across the nation to defund the police. That argument was totally antithetical to all of the questions we heard on the ground from people we represented, when their questions to us were just the opposite. Shirelle Parker, as our council person, where are our beat officers and our bike patrol? Why are they not proactively policing and patrolling our communities, the body, a physical presence of law enforcement? Obviously, and I need to say this for the record, with zero tolerance for any misuse and abuse of authority. We needed to state that. We have in the city now, thanks to Councilmember Curtis Jones, we have a Citizens Police Oversight Committee that we will be funding during this budget process. In addition to that, thanks to Councilmember Kenyatta Johnson, we also have an Office of the Victims Advocate for the first time. So victims of crime, all kinds of crime, will now have a place whose job it is, who are intentional about ensuring that victims of violence in our city get access to services. Shirelle, why was community policing the hallmark and the foundation of this plan you presented, calling for 300 officers? And for those of you who are familiar with council, you know, council is made up of 10 council districts. In my mind, that would appropriate 30 officers dedicated to community policing in each council district, which ranges from about 150 to 175, 180,000 people. But remember, this is preventive. These officers are not coming into neighborhoods simply to respond to a crime. They are growing to be a part of the fabric of it. In addition to that, we talk about the challenges facing the police department now, the hiring of more police and other personnel challenges. We talk about recruitment. That is something now that has become really popular, but we've been talking about this for some time. We talk about streamlining the recruitment process. Linda Orfanelli is on here. Linda, you know what that is like and how long that process takes. We talk about the need for Philadelphia to finally get it right, maximize the efficient use of our scarce police officers at this time. How can you do this? Well, one way. How about having public safety enforcement officers to enforce things like, you know, traffic movement, along with parking issues, and or sitting at construction sites? Why would we need officers who are fully equipped and trained with the know-how to patrol our streets to literally be, in my mind, wasting scarce resources on a service that could well be addressed and provided by a civilian workforce? Also, strengthen the pipeline for the police department, and not just police, but the entire city. We want to have a police department whose diversity is reflective of Philadelphia's demographics. How will we do that? I think that we should strengthen and develop more pipelines like our Explorers program. I am proud to note for the record, and Rachel, I don't know if you noticed this, after we introduced our plan, the police commissioner came on and noted that she did what we knew she had the authority to do without any legislation, and that is she lowered the age allowable for members to enter into the department, giving our young explorers the ability to come into the Explorers program, and by the time they are finished with the program, they'll be eligible to participate in the training, take all of the tests associated with becoming a police officer. The next issue that is now becoming extremely popular, if you'll notice, folks who've never talked about quality of life issues in our neighborhoods have now understood that it's the bread and butter issues that keep neighborhoods in the city of Philadelphia safe, that people are concerned about. And that is not only a presence of law enforcement, it is what we call quality of life issues. Shirelle, when you talk about this, What are you referencing? Not only increase funding to police, but for the Commerce Department and the Streets Department, along with our commercial quarters. And Andy, you know how I feel about our neighborhood-based commercial quarters, Tom, and I just talked about some new work Pew is doing. I feel like these are the veins of our neighborhoods. And to be quite frank, the largest job creators in the city and in our neighborhoods. Cameras are extremely important. We need to get them up. We need to make sure they are of great quality, where they can get great visuals, that somebody is monitoring these cameras up in real time, and they shouldn't be a scarce resource for a connected few. In addition to that, we talk about L&I, securing vacant buildings and addressing nuisances in the city. Shirelle, what are you talking about? Well, only if you don't live in neighborhoods, particularly Black and brown ones in our city, you wouldn't know this. And that is, we've had a proliferation of a 24-hour type of business that is in essence getting a permit as a grocery store, sort of like convenience providers. But they also get, in some cases, when they're operating legally, a tobacco license. And now they are selling drug paraphernalia, and they're open 24 hours. Well, they have become havens for crime in the city of Philadelphia. And, you know, day after day, from the loitering there, the drug use and drug sales there, they have become a negative contributors to the quality of life in neighborhoods across the city. Next, we have victim and witness services. You heard me talk about the Office of the Victim's Advocate. We talk about out-of-the-box strategies. I didn't know about this, right? Because this is not something that I experienced directly. Gentleman by the name of Pete Lyde. Some of you may know him as the son-in-law to the late great Joe Frazier, the boxer. Many years ago, his son was murdered through a senseless and random act of gun violence. Well, it was a cold case sort of investigation for many years. Pete never stopped pursuing, trying to find out what happened to his son. He said to me, Shirelle, I know that there are people in the city, and I'm a dog lover. I have had a dog in my life since I was a child. But he said there are people that will put up a larger reward for in their search for a lost pet who is a part of their family than we see the city of Philadelphia offering when it is trying to secure clues and tips when trying to solve crime. That was something that we said we wanted the city of Philadelphia to consider. In addition to that, we talk about these defective street lights. It was nearly 13,000 that were defective when we were researching and working on our plan. And we have insisted that the streets department, working with its vendors and our in-house contractors, address those issues, along with neighborhood commercial corridor cleaning. Why did you connect the two? If you talk to any person who is familiar with quality of life issues in the neighborhood, the place where crime thrives is a place that is dark. It is not well lit. It does not have any cameras. It is dirty. It is littered with trash, you know, plagued by illegal dumping. It is filled with graffiti. And that visual that I just described for you sends a signal to anyone interested in engaging in criminal activity that this place, space, and or neighborhood is literally open for business. How do we stop that? Addressing those issues that you just heard me mention. We talk about 911, the dispatch system. Been advocating for this, again, long before it became a headline, during the midst of the civil unrest that we experienced here in the city. Well, another thing that we found that Philadelphia didn't effectively employ the use of, we traveled to New York City. Special thanks to New York Mayor Eric Adams, along with members of his police department, several deputies and inspectors and captains who met with us to talk about how New York has employed the use of texting. Somebody is saying, wait a minute, Shirelle, we don't have the ability to do that now here in the city of Philadelphia. Well, I've been told that our infrastructure is in place, that we have the capacity, but it is not a tool that we have employed the use of, because I would argue, based on visually seeing, interacting, and learning about the size of New York's workforce within their 911 dispatch system, that those who are specifically deployed and they focus on the texting is totally different from the over $150 million that our city of Philadelphia said that they would need in order to stand up a texting model. Why is this true? I want to give you some context. We heard about the tragedy in Buffalo. I don't know if you've been following the story, but apparently there was a young woman who attempted to call 911 to tell them that there was an active shooter. However, she was whispering on the call. The 911 the operator, the dispatcher, literally told this woman, I need you to stop whispering. You don't have to whisper. You have to speak louder. So the woman couldn't speak louder because she was already putting her life at risk by even calling 911. So just think about this, Philadelphia, if that would have occurred to you, or think about the tragedy that took place on the L that we basically learned really wasn't as people reported. But imagine being in a confined place and you can't verbally call. Wouldn't the ability to be able to text them be another strategy that we should be employing to ensure that we're doing everything that we can to make public safety, which is I would argue to you, this is just my humble opinion, that it is the floor. It is the bare minimum. It is the primary responsibility of any city, the public safety of all of our residents and those who in any way, shape, or form come in contact with our city. The final part of this is strengthening community engagement. We needed to make sure that people understood that when we talked about community policing, when we talked about quality of life, when we talked about supporting, victims of crime and for those witnesses, that we were not doing any of this sort of in a vacuum. We knew that there needed to be a comprehensive approach. And if we looked at that, that would include more training for neighborhood safety groups, town watches, those neighbors who look out, who town watch multiple ways. It's no longer just walking up and down the street with the walkie-talkie in your hand, because some people don't feel safe doing that. But it is also people who are just looking out the windows, communicating with each other, sending an email chain out to residents in their area, organizing their blocks. We need to target more resources there. In addition to that, we talk about ensuring that there are alternative paths and programs for at-risk use. I'm proud of our historic investment here in our great city of Philadelphia, and community-based organizations that are on the ground doing the work to help provide alternatives to a life in crime for many of our young people. For some whom, and I do want to state this for the record, they think that that is their only option, because that is what has been a part of their lives. In addition to that, enforce youth curfews, investing in community evening resource centers, the CERCs. There are 2 standing up now, 2 others proud one is coming to our region. This was championed, this issue, something that was up and going during the street administration. It was stopped during another administration, and we are now reinvesting in that effort. We also have our $400 million neighborhood preservation initiative. Shirelle, you talking about neighborhood preservation, I thought you were talking about public safety. For those of you who know the city and have worked with the city, you know that there is a direct correlation. In communities where there is a higher rate of home ownership, where there is access to the opportunity to preserve and enhance an individual's most valuable asset, particularly for Black and Brown and in working class communities. And I don't care if they are white, green, yellow, orange, or purple. When folks have had access to neighborhood stabilization dollars for restore, repair, renew, a loan that you could get, it was $25 going up to $50,000 to fix up your home in any way that you see fit. 10 years to pay it back, minimum credit score of 580, fixed interest rate of 3%. Those are the kind of tools that we think will help to strengthen our neighborhoods. And I already mentioned continued investments in grants to reduce gun violence. One of the areas that I don't think that we give a lot of concern to, that we should, is we don't think about, and this is true in my personal life story, aside from schools, we don't think about the community-based organizations on a daily basis, like our Little Leagues, like our PALs, like the Ed Snyder Hockey Foundation's programs in rec centers and in neighborhoods across this city, and the prevention that those organizations provide. While we are definitely in crisis mode, you don't know how worse we would be without these organizations on the ground, connecting to young people whose lives are not rooted in the manner that we know. And here I am telling my age that I'm going to be 50 this year. They are not living like Wally and Beaver. That is not their lives. They're not even living like the Huxtables, right? With Rudy and Theo and Vanessa. They are not. They are living in households similar to the one that I grew up in, being raised by someone other than their biological parents. I was fortunate to have my grandparents to raise me, who had welfare, public assistance, food stamps, $98 every 2 weeks, cash assistance. That is what you employed the use of to take care of me. We have to make sure that we are talking about providing supports and services. I don't care if we're talking about in the school district and or for these neighborhood-based organizations, that our children are not growing up in the traditional nuclear families that we knew of in the past. In addition to that, and I do want to say this because someone mentioned this at a community meeting, and I said I really knew that they had done absolutely no work on the ground, that they even in their advocacy of saying they were speaking for, in my mind, they thought they were going to save Black and Brown people. They knew absolutely nothing about what it was really like to live in poverty. And I grew up in the crack cocaine era, in the 80s, my working class Northwest Philadelphia uptown community, as we refer to it, that has a significantly higher rate of home ownership, particularly for its Black residents. That quality of life just dwindled when crack cocaine came and consumed that community through those who were addicted to the substance and or those who found themselves in our criminal justice system because they got on the underground economic side of selling the substance. That's how I know that if someone is proffering something like a safe injection site as a tool to rid the city of its opioid crisis. I know that you've never lived in or grew up in a community that way, because if one did, they would give thought to why folks who have lived in communities such as this advocated against that tool when it was proposed here in our city by the mayor and supported by various elected officials in our city, because long-term treatment for drug abuse, addiction of any kind, along with mental and behavioral health challenges, access to the therapy and medical supports, again, along with long-term treatment, we view as a much more substantive tools that we should be employing the use of. That's it for what I'm going to go through. Rachel will put a link, because it's really important to me, you all, that you get access to this and you're able to share this plan, again, that is very specific. I am not Mary Herdick. If Bill Miller and Charmaine were together right now, they would say, we don't need any more expert AOPs. AOPs are expert articulators of the problem. These are people who do extremely well with bullhorns, telling our city officials and everyone in our city, and they can really be very strong and articulate in communicating what those problems are. However, they are really short on solutions. And 9 times out of 10, those solutions haven't been developed by talking to the people who are directly impacted by them. It's important for you to know that this plan that you're viewing was developed from the ground up. Marathon hearings that I held about public safety, its impact on commercial corridors, to hear business owners, because you know what people in this city will do. They will try to use race, sex, class, religion, anything that they can to divide people in our great city. But when we talked about public safety and its impact on neighborhood commercial corridors and small businesses, you had to see our immigrant business owners with the Black business owners and the LGBT business owners and folks from the Northeast, from the river to South Philly, to West Philly, to Northwest Philadelphia, to North Philadelphia, to the center. And that's why I mentioned Paul Levy to you earlier. And I told you to put a pin in it, because here for once were all of these, business owners, business advocates, neighborhood advocates coming together saying public safety is having an impact. It has an economic impact in our city and on our commercial corridors, and we must address it, because we in the city of Philadelphia, and some of you may be shocked to hear it from me. The folks who have worked from the city are not. Jeff is not shocked to hear this from me. Neither is Linda. Elected officials, particularly in the legislative branch, and for this, Lord knows, I thank my 10 years in Harrisburg, that experience taught me this. And you have to remember, I had to negotiate and do business and work with Republicans. I worked under a Republican governor, a Republican controlled House, a Republican controlled Senate, and I didn't have the luxury of using a bullhorn saying the Republicans are big, bad, evil people. And the reason why I can't get anything done is because the Republicans are in charge. When I felt like that was the message, and we couldn't, like when it came to, if it was choice, if it was trying to control the flow of illegal guns, I was the leader of Lost and Stolen. I would stand up and debate them, fighting voter ID. I led that effort. I knew how to do that. But guess what? When Dr. Haidt said that the school district was going to have to lay off 1,700 people and that schools wouldn't open in September during that year, my tenure in the Pennsylvania House, I didn't have the luxury of doing that. It was my job to deliver a solution, and we found a way to do it. So when you look at this plan, this is not me, Shirelle Parker, thinking she knows what's best for the people of Philadelphia. I did something that more elected officials should do. You know how we spend money instead of trying to figure out how to grow the economic pie? Well, we found a way to listen. And, two ears, one mouth for a reason, use them in proportion. We found a way to listen and proffer an answer, a solution that we believe if you employ the use of this plan with the city of Philadelphia's current policing strategies, that we can make our city safer, cleaner, and a city that provides access to economic opportunity for all. Not sexy, but remember those 3 bullet points. Safer, cleaner, while providing access to economic opportunity for all, putting people on a path to self-sufficiency that gives them the ability to take care of themselves. If you want to see dignity, heads up, shoulders back, pride, owning the house, that is how we will help to decrease poverty, eliminate it, eradicate it in our city, and make Philadelphia more safer. Now I'm going to go on mute and listen and take questions from you.
Thank you, Councilmember Parker. I just want to say we hear the same. I've been hearing the same things. Working community development, have worked in. Those of us who've worked in the city know that it's about sometimes the fundamentals. And they're not always sexy, but if you don't stand up for them, they don't get done. So we have to focus on things that we can make that difference in. And you should really speak with more passion. I don't get that passion. No, really the energy that Councilmember Parker brings, I think we all feel that. And I get more energy when I listen to her. So I know, Jeff, you have some questions, and I don't know if I'm moderating or Tom's moderating. And I know
you are.
Paige got some questions too.
Yeah.
You want to go, Jeff, first?
Sure. Thanks, Councilmember Parker. Shirelle, as always, passionate and smart. And one of the things I've always loved about you is no person can claim to know everything, right? Together we are a genius, right? That's my mantra. Some would say I am an expert articulator of the problem, but I love that. I love that phrase. So, you said a couple things that are really important. I love the community, as a former president of Queen Village Neighbors Association and a current board member of Northern Liberties Neighbors Association, definitely agree entirely with the fact that we need cops who know their neighborhoods, that come from those neighborhoods, that walk the beat. We were fortunate in Queen Village that we had enough money to set up our own police mini station. So we had a great set of officers who really knew the community. And that's really important. So the policing thing, I really am down with 100%. I always thought the defund the police rhetoric was it was rhetoric that was useful to push people to think a little differently about policing. But the idea that we should ever take away, when you say people who haven't worked on the ground will tell you defund the police, but having worked for the janitors union for 10 years, people want better policing and more safety, not less safety. But we've got a police training problem. We let people become police who have a lot of biases and a lot of fear and anger, and that's a problem. So we need to do better training. I'd love to hear more about your thoughts on that. But the job problem and the home ownership problem, right? So Philadelphia has a much smaller gap between black and white homeowners than most other cities. Yet, if you look at the equity differences, what a black person's house in Philadelphia is worth versus what a white person's house in Philadelphia is worth, it's enormous. And we're actually finishing a study looking at property values from the last 70 years, 70, to see those value changes over time by race and by neighborhood. And it's testing the Jeff hypothesis, which is that, gentrification is a much, much, much smaller problem in Philadelphia than the destruction of property value for our citizens and communities of color, right? Folks have invested, done the right things. I think of my 60-year-old black women janitors who bought homes in West Philly, North Philly, and, did everything they were supposed to do, worked hard, played by the rules, paid 50 grand for a house 20, 25 years ago and could sell it for 50 grand today, right? I bought a house in Queen Village. I doubled my investment in 15 years. Right? I'm lucky, I'm white, pick the right zip code, whatever it is. But our policies and our practices have led to the situation where folks own homes that are worth less than they paid for them in real terms. I'd love to hear some ideas about how we're going to reinvest, not just in the homes themselves, there's money for that, but rebuilding those neighborhoods so those homes reappreciate in value. And then the last question I'll ask is about tax reform. There are some people who love to say, if we only change the tax code, everything would change in Philadelphia. I don't believe that. I believe that workforce development is much more important. I'm not saying tax reform is unimportant, but we have 200,000 Philadelphians at least who have been involved with the criminal injustice system and have been disenfranchised from the labor market. So I'd love to hear your thoughts also about how we bring folks back into the job market and where you think tax reform plays a role.
So one, I love Jeff speak and Jeff think, and I am biased. You all should know because I think he is one of the best and the brightest, and I am so glad that he is at the Economy League. Jeff, let me say this to you. I want to start backwards. You get it, which is why you noted that workforce development, you can see more priority on the need for workforce development and how it could, in essence, help to grow the tax base, because now we are employing people with access to the skills that they need so they can be self-sufficient and contributing significantly more to the tax base. However, I do want to state for the record, when you hear members of the business community talk about Philadelphia's high rate in the wage tax, how we are no longer economically competitive when a major firm is thinking about where it wants to locate, its business, and they look in our region, they think about other places in the nation that appear to be more business friendly because there are less business taxes. I understand that, but and would agree with it. We do need to reduce our wage tax. I would argue when people think about the good times, and many of you were here during these times, but when you mention Ed Rendell and those years, when you mention John Street, you see suns, pictures of sun and great days come back into people's minds because they think about when we were able to address issues in neighborhoods and in Center City, so that when Ed Rendell and or John Street said we needed to accelerate the reduction of the wage tax, we could get that done because Ed Rendell and John Street were credible messengers in neighborhoods. And what they said was, listen, to the people in neighborhoods, we have to be concerned about what happens in Center City, and we want to have a more business-friendly climate, because when we generate more revenue and create more jobs by having more businesses, we're going to make sure that people employ you. That's going to help stabilize our neighborhoods. Jeff, I don't think that and I want to be as diplomatic as I can here, I don't think that message has been effectively communicated to the people of Philadelphia. The idea that you talked about for when you talk about home ownership, and you talked about the gap, that the gap was not necessarily as it related to who owned the home, but more as it related to the value of homes. Again, for me, Johnny on the spot, one of the things that we noticed, and most of you on here know that I was with Councilwoman Marion Tasco, a member of her team, when we actually defined this issue that I can remember some Pennsylvania legislators and folks across the nation saying, don't touch that. That's not local government's responsibility. This market will, correct itself. Well, that was in 08 and 09. And you remember what was prevailing. It was something called predatory lending that hadn't been defined in our city. We did that here in the city of Philadelphia. But what we've noticed recently, Jeff, that correlates to what you just mentioned, is we also saw bias in appraisals. You've seen the qualitative narratives from across the country. I know I just made $100,000 worth of improvements to my property. It was worth $300. Now it should be, worth $450,000 or $500,000. Well, you get it appraised, Shirelle does, and it comes back under. Well, we do what we call whitewash the house. We take out everything that we have in the house. And I call my Jewish mother, Mary Herdick, and I say, now, an appraiser is coming. I took down all of Langston's pictures, all of my Black art. Now you come and act as if you are the person to show the house. And Mary does it. She's her fabulous self. And all of a sudden that appraisal comes back and it's $600,000. We're working with Ira Goldstein and TRF right now. We're going to be releasing a report. We've been doing that for about, again, Jeff, almost a year worth of meetings and study and research, working with a PHFA. Happy about Marsha Fudge, now head of HUD in the Biden administration, although they didn't go far enough, we think, as it relates to trying to correct the reasons, the systemic reasons that appraisal bias is prevailing. But we get that, and you are right. In addition to that, I have to go back to something that you said. This is where your credibility comes. And this is what I'm hoping that each of you will pay attention to. Jeff is now at one of the most credible, well-respected research sort of academia-based institutions in the Economy League based on its history. He was a community-based leader in the neighborhood in Queen Village, but also worked with SCIU. When you have had broad-based experiences like that, it gives you a different lens to see through that you use to help you develop or proffer solutions to very comprehensive challenges. And I would argue that that has not been what's been happening in our city. When we look at what's been proffered, like safe injection sites, or for example, I don't know where you stand, but I need to say it. Talking about our challenges with those who are unhoused, our homeless population, and people recommending that the solution to that was the development of tiny houses. Tiny houses with communal restrooms, with poor people being concentrated in one particular area. For those of you who know me and know my story, I just gave you a quick snapshot, but grandparents migrated from the South to North Philadelphia to Richard Allen homes. They were eventually called Richard Allen Projects, but when they were first built, they were built as to provide stable housings for returning veterans. Daddy was a Navy veteran. They lived in Richard Allen and then moved to 7th and Dolphin, and from 7th and Dolphin to North Philadelphia. When you tell me you want to concentrate a group of poor people together because Shirelle Parker has a lived experience that happens to include poverty, I begin to think high-rise projects. I begin to think these areas that had subpar amenities, subpar supermarkets, subpar schools, subpar everything, because people living in poverty were concentrated in one area. So when you hear a Shirelle Parker say that that's not a solution for me, and I don't think that would be best in Philadelphia, please know that it's not because I'm being insensitive. It's because where you stand on this is perfect. Listen to this. Where you stand on an issue depends on where you sit. Where you stand on an issue depends on where you sit. So that's why my lens is a little different. So Jeff, I hope that I have in some way given you my recommendations. Tax reform is needed, but no one's going to be able to do the tough work that it's going to take to get it done until they have delivered for the people in neighborhoods and provided them something that they can touch, see, and feel in their own neighborhoods. Remember John Street said, I'm gonna give myself 40 days to remove 40,000 cars. If you were to talk to the average Philadelphian in the neighborhood today, guess what? They remember those abandoned cars being removed off of their blocks. It was big. It was out of the box thinking. It wasn't that bureaucratic. No, my mentor Tasco, she calls that I be here when you come and I be here when you go. Bureaucratic speak, right? They just, anything you want to do, they want to tell you about why you can't get it done. We can't have that kind of thinking. So thank you, Jeff, for those comments.
Pedro, yeah.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you, Andy. Good to see you, Councilmember Parker. First, I'd like to commend you for putting together this plan. You see, often people like to shoot from the hip without any substantive body of work behind to back up analyzing the problem and putting some demands. I had 3 questions, and they're related to the police aspect of your plan. And then I mostly because I had not read the full project yet. Number 1 is, I know Council President Clark had proposed the idea of utilizing non-armed officers or a civilian corps to handle the traffic issue. So what happened to that? I know that the union just complained, but then it didn't go formally, and it seemed to have been dropped. 2, how is the police contract going to be handled under your proposal? For a number of reasons. For example, my 3 or so years on the human resources, and the police handle almost entirely, except for the entry point, they handle entirely the hiring process for police officers. And the vetting aspect of that process is the most biased, the most uncoordinated, the worst of all kinds, that eliminates people of color on an astronomical rate. What's gonna happen to that?
Can I interrupt you for a minute?
Yeah.
At one time, the Department of Human Resources did that, but they lost the reason. The reason the police do it is because of lack of resources for human resources. Go ahead. And it wasn't as biased then.
Exactly. And my 3rd question relates to the community policing part of it. I'm a strong advocate of that. We used community policing when we were doing anti-drug organizing in Norwich Square about 30 years ago. It was highly effective. But the entire incentive of the police department, or anyone getting into a career into police department in Philadelphia, is to get out of from walking the streets. How's that going to change the culture? And finally, I just had to make a comment that I personally have some high expectations of the new police commissioner. And every day he goes, more the things stay the same and return to the old ways of doing things. Nothing has substantially changed in Philadelphia. Actually, based on the crime that we're facing, things are worse than they ever were.
Wow.
So those are my questions.
So I want to go first, Pedro. Hi, Pedro. How you doing? Good to see you. First, I want to go to the issue associated with residency. And again, I hate to keep picking them out, but I work with them in this area, and I know they know it because they were there. Both Pedro and Linda know that in the city of Philadelphia, and you all know, I was pulling my hair out when people were talking about the residency requirement being a barrier to entry for police recruitment. And Linda, I don't know if people told you, if you ever saw me doing any of the television interviews, and even during the hearing, I quoted you in testimony that you gave during previous efforts to undo the residency requirement, which was rule of thumb in the city for over 50 years. And I noted for the record that the mayor in the city of Philadelphia has the authority, or department has the authority, to request a waiver when filling a position that is essential arises. And for some odd reason, the residency, that became an issue. Finally, guess what Mayor Kenny did? You all are not going to believe it. We asked for waivers. Guess what? The police department can now waive the waiver as it relates to residency, and it can recruit from a larger pool of people now, particularly because we're in crisis mode. And we can get more officers. So we did that. That's not.
Shirelle, you got it. You definitely got it.
Listen, but I used your words. I used your words. I mean, thankfully, we had transcripts, so it helped. Again, it wasn't emotion that I was using to respond. You could not counter the facts from the transcript. And so they finally did it. In addition to that, Pedro, when you talked about human resources and you talked about the lack of resources and the negotiations, what happened when Clark was talking about those civilianizing those portions of the department? Yes, the FOP is still giving those same arguments, but I would argue we're having conversations and doing our best to make some headway. But Clark is not giving up on it. Neither are members of council. But you know the hell that we're going through right now in order to see all of that through in no way, shape, or form, because they view it, although Baltimore has done it, although Ramsey talked about when he was in Chicago, they did it. They are still viewing this as us taking work from FOP members. So that's still under under negotiations, lack of resources. You all in particular would have been proud to hear HR talk about new strategies for recruitment. They talked about having a mobile unit now, different mobile units that can go, across the city, have stations where people can literally take the tests on a computer who may not have them at home. They can take a test on a computer, and talk about diversity and inclusion, diversifying Philly's workforce. They're able to go out and do that. And we talked about in council and are advocating for more resources for them to do just that. So I'm really excited. In addition to that, Pedro and Linda, for years, what stopped you from being able to diversify Philadelphia's workforce? You know what it was, guys? It was something called the rule of two. Again, not sexy, but it said that only those who take civil service tests, the top 2 candidates, are who you have to start with, you can take, and/or if it's 8 positions, you can select. You definitely have to take the top 2. And we said, wait a minute. And for those of you who know me, I'm a certified secondary English teacher by profession. I am a firm believer that standardized tests like the ACT, the SAT, they are not the sole indicators of what future productivity and performance will be of a young person of any race, class, or socioeconomic status there is, and how they're going to perform in college. But rather, there are some people who are trained to take standardized tests better. And to be quite frank, I think they're biased, because if I gave some of those same people who perform well on the SAT and the ACT, if I gave them, and this has been done, if I gave them a survival test, living on a fixed income that was minimum wage, and I asked them to answer questions about, how they would take care of a family of 4 living on $15 an hour, and what their monthly budget would look like and how they would invest it. How much you want to bet that some of those same people who scored well on the SAT and the ACT, they would do poorly on that test, because that's not their lived experience. So we worked with the union. All of the unions, we told them now, and the only reason why we could get it done is because we told them this was a barrier to diversify the workforce. They're still on me like white on rice about it. It wasn't an easy decision. They didn't like it. But when you make tough decisions that you firmly believe in, you find a way to build the coalitions necessary. And I'm proud to tell you that we have eliminated the rule of 2 in the city of Philadelphia, and we now can be intentional about who we select, why we select them, and their experience in doing the job versus just how they performed on a test. So hopefully I hit all 3 of your issues, and even Pedro, even you, just like Jeff talked about his work in Queen Village, when you talked about knowledge of community policing and officers getting out their cars and walking the street, you can't make that statement simply because you read a white paper about community policing, but rather the strategy works because you worked on the ground in North Square, you've employed the use of the tool, and you've seen what what it can do when it's employed appropriately. And we know the dangers of not making sure that there are checks and balances for law enforcement and seeing policing abuse and a misuse and abuse of authority. So that where you stand on the issue of community policing is different, right? Because of your experience. And that's what I want each of you to keep in your mind.
Thank you. I just want to briefly, if I may, the question of the vetting of the applicants. In my experience with the city, the applicants for the police department, we never had a problem with getting applicants. We never had a problem with people passing the test. We have a problem with the vetting process. The vetting process, to me, I believe is deeply flawed, is deeply biased against people of color. And I can tell you horror stories of people who were through the ringer. Oh, you know, give you a good example. Oh, come on, Johnny, tell me, you were smoke pot, you know, you smoke, you know, you can tell me. It's very useful for you to tell the truth. You're gonna be a police officer. You have to tell the truth. Yes, in high school I smoked pot. Disqualified. Well, you told me to tell you the truth. And then those who lie and say, no, I never touched the stuff, they get passed. So that's a piece of the recruitment process that should be, I think, detached from the police department, and an independent body do that vetting process.
It has been adjusted, Pedro, because aside from what you just described, I know you probably all saw the story when they were talking about a person's credit score being a factor in determining whether or not you were eligible to be considered to be a police be in the police department in the city of Philadelphia. That was a barrier to entry. Not only that, it's the psychological examination. Well, what about cultural competency? Who are the people who are providing the psychological exams? Is there diversity and inclusion in those firms? Now, Pedro, the reading test, even more than what you just said, the Nelson-Denny reading test, which is required, not based on local law, it's based on state law. That is a barrier to entry. And finally, the last barrier that I want to say that is really causing a lot of harm. Now, I'm not telling you I could pass it, because to be quite frank, I couldn't. I'm being honest with you. It's been a long time since I was a cheerleader or I ran track, but it's the physical. You will be surprised of how many folks are not passing the physical. So what we've had to do is make adjustments and continue to push the department to make adjustments in those areas. But again, when you mention this idea of who was in a position to vet folks, and if somebody via the polygraph test said, yes, I smoked marijuana, you know, when I was in college. That is true, and we have questioned all of those qualifying factors. So thank you for putting that on the record.
Anyone else at this point? I think we're at 1:10. So
can I just make a final ask,
yeah.
Andy?
Mm-hmm.
Andy and Tom, thank you so very much for having me today. I hope for the members of this group that you view the Philadelphia Neighborhood Safety and Community Policing Plan that was proffered as something that you can get behind, that's something that you will support. Andy, when we talk about slogans that seem to develop steam, but are not necessarily reflective of what, you know, real Philadelphians are thinking, part of the reason why is because the people who are promoting the slogans are extremely loud. They are very vocal and they are very well organized. So what I would ask of each of you, if you are a part of Queen Village, of North Square, of any civic associations in the city, this organization, from a policy perspective, if you reviewed it and you would provide a quote of support during the budget, we're going to be advocating and are advocating for the implementation of this plan that will require some additional resources, but some significant policy changes. Can you get a letter writing campaign going? Us just saying, you know what, yeah, I can get behind it, but not activating the base, the constituency, the people power behind the respective organizations that we are a part of, it will all be for naught. And that those who are loudest, with the loudest bullhorns, whose volumes are up to 10, that is what and who will prevail. If those of us who want to get things done don't get activated in this system. Finally, I want to say this. Let me say this to you. I hope you paid attention to our election and the results. A lot of people were shocked and surprised by them. I wasn't. People were shocked, surprised, and dismayed by the really sad turnout here in the city of Philadelphia. Obviously, aside from being a council person, I'm a ward leader. The ward I represent happens to be, the highest voting ward, particularly of the Black community in the city of Philadelphia. But even with that, our turnout was only 32%. When you go down to the 8th Ward, 15th Ward, the 1st Ward, 2nd Ward, areas that, are growing, that have a high rate of participation, even the 9th Ward here in Chestnut Hill, and you see numbers that were maybe about 39%. Guess what? The city's turnout rate was about 19.4%. We're going to wait for the final ballots to be counted to see if we even break 20 at all. I would dare say to each of you, people are not connecting what's happening in government to what they see when they walk out their doors. And it's being reflected. It's never an excuse. And I will advocate for that as strongly as I possibly can. But when you are living in a neighborhood and you walk out your house and it is dirty, it is not well lit, you don't feel that it is safe there, you don't feel like there's any job training, workforce development to help you get access to what's growing, Andy, eds and meds, biotech. Yeah, but what Philadelphians are being even trained to clean biotech? Somebody's saying, well, that's just cleaning. But cleaning in a biotech lab, that's high tech cleaning. That takes a very special and specific skill set. Why haven't we connected that workforce development directly to Philadelphia schools and our, neighborhoods that have been left out, of the mix, to give them access to opportunities? All of the things that we have to advocate for, but it just can't come from people like Shirelle, has to come from people like you who love our city. Thank you all so much.
Thanks. Great connecting all the dots. There's a lot of dots to connect, obviously. And I think that's it. We are really thankful to have you here. And you didn't talk about your future, but I assume we'll hear about that at some point later on.
Andy, I think I'll give it to you all. I will tell you that I will be able to come back and talk with each of you, I believe, this fall to talk about, and I will be unhinged. I will literally be free to have a conversation with you all very formally this fall. But I know you read the newspapers and you know how long I've been working in this city and how much I love this city. And I'm going to put everything I have on the line to come to every neighborhood in this city to try to earn their respect and support, because I'm going to listen to them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much.